Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Magic Bricks Hangout series. Our endeavor is to trigger a buy and bring back consumer confidence in the real estate market. Looking at the current situation of Chennai right now, the topic of today's session is smart planning to prevent environmental crisis. To discuss on the same, we have Mr. M Vijayabaskar, Associate Professor at the Madras Institute of Development Studies, Chennai, on board. Mr. Bhaskar holds a PhD in economics from Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, and has been a visiting faculty at IIT Madras, EHESS Paris, and a visiting fellow at the School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London. His research centers on how regional political economy mediates processes of urban and rural transformation and labor markets. Bhaskar has published in numerous scholarly journals and media outlets, including the Economic Times, the Financial Express. At present, he is involved in a study on how mega projects such as IT corridors and industrial parks shape the development of Chennai. I also welcome E. Jayashree Kuru, Head of Content and Research Team Magic Bricks. She has been a business journalist for over 2 decades with the Times of India, the Economic Times, and the Financial Express. She forayed into research in 2002. She's a regular guest columnist with a number of established media, including the Times of India Group, and others. So, without any further delay, let's take up the questions quickly. Over to you, Jayashree, now.
Thank you, Pushpa. Viewers, one of the reasons why we conduct these hangouts is so that we can get the best in the industry to come and talk about your problems and address the issues that are coming up all the time. Now, Chennai was a big eye-opener across the country because after the massive flooding in Mumbai, I think people had become complacent about the role of planning in urban infrastructure and how it impacts the life of citizens. We have had the JNNURM, which was the Jawaharlal Nehru National Urban Renewal Mission, which was to help our cities to revive, to restructure themselves. And now we have the Smart Cities plan, where we have 98 smart cities and 500 Amrut cities, where the government of India is actually funding infrastructure growth so that cities can be better managed. Today we thought the best thing that we should be doing is to address the questions that people have raised. Pushpa, if you could start with the first question, it would be nice to start.
Yes, Jayashree, I'll just start with the queries.
In the meantime, Bhaskar, maybe one of the things that we should talk about is why is it so important for cities to be planned, the infrastructure and the real estate, and how often does this planning get refreshed?
I mean, I'll try to be as brief as possible and cut me, when you think other questions are kind of coming in. See, the key thing is, two things we need to kind of understand. One is the urban is also in some sense a living organism. To that extent, it has its own dynamics. It evolves, over time. And in some sense, planning has to make sure that this evolution, is in some sense is healthy. Yeah, it shouldn't fall sick. I think that's the key kind of metaphor that I can think of at this stage. And to that extent, and also it's also one needs to kind of realize, once you kind of imagine that the urban organism as a living kind of institution, then you also need to realize that it's not enough to just govern one aspect of the urban. It's not just land. It has to be water. It has to be air, both as input and also as output. What we kind of let into the ecosystem, and also how we kind of rely on the ecosystem to sustain our kind of needs. And these things change with time and changes in space. I mean, there are different parts of the city. You have different kinds of requirements, and all these things put together it's so important for planning to kind of, step in to kind of ensure that this moves smoothly. Yeah.
Okay, Bhaskar, let me take the first query that has come in. According to you, what are the drawbacks in social infrastructure of Chennai that led to the huge loss? I'm not even sure it is social infrastructure. I think it was more to do with physical infrastructure, which led to the huge losses last month.
Right. Yeah. I think there are two sets of reasons. One is kind of long term, and these are reasons which are not unique to Chennai, which has to do with the fact that seldom one, planning and actual developments, don't kind of coincide. Yeah, that is one. And second, planning itself, does not take into account the fact that water bodies are a very, very important component of the urban ecosystem, and you can't just see it as a wasteland, over which developments can be, infrastructure can be kind of created. Just to give you an example, Chennai has about three, rivers flowing through the city at different points, and all these three rivers are actually linked through the Buckingham Canal. And all these four together, in fact, in some sense, has vested Chennai with a fairly robust kind of a natural advantage as far as drainage is concerned. Yeah, and with huge number of canals kind of feeding into these rivers and the Buckingham Canal. But unfortunately, all these spaces have been seen as just mere kind of wasteland, which allows the government to actually acquire this huge amounts of land to either build the IT corridor, to build the MRTS, to build plans, to build metro stations, large markets, and so on. And this problem, I mean, to be fair to the planners of Chennai, this is not unique to Chennai. I mean, take Bangalore, take Mumbai. That's the way it has been. Look at where stadiums across the country have been built. Yeah, I think that's key to see. I think that the most important lesson is urban planning and policymakers cannot any longer look at water bodies as mere lands to kind of be used for putting up infrastructure. Yeah, I think that's yeah.
So there we have another query here which says that according to you, what are the urban infra plans that the city should undertake to avoid natural disasters like floods?
Sorry, come again. I didn't get the
What
first.
are the urban infra plans that a city should undertake to avoid natural disasters like the floods that happen?
Okay, just a small kind of a correction. I mean, I think the Chennai floods is definitely not a natural disaster, so that's the first thing. I mean, I would like to say this right at the outset. It is kind of man-made, for the simple reason that, please remember, Chennai floods was not due to a cyclone or a hurricane or anything of the kind, a tsunami or anything of the kind. It was just an excessive a year of excessive monsoon rains, and Chennai, we know, looking at past history, every 4-5 years we do kind of see this. Yeah, so to that extent, and you also have to realize that Chennai has always a chronically water-starved city. So on the one hand, year after year you have chronic water shortage, and the metro water, the Chennai's public water utility itself draws upon a huge pool of private water supplies to kind of feed the city of Chennai. That is one. And large parts of Chennai, especially the new kind of areas where real estate development is taking place, are invariably served only by private water supply. You don't really have the public water supply, utility, supplying water to these parts. And even where it is being, where Metro Water is supplying, the water quantum is, way below the actual kind of requirements of the Chennai city, So on the one hand, you have a huge amount of so-called excess kind of rains, leading to excessive flooding and draining of the sea. On the other hand, you have year after year, the Chennai city suffering from water shortages of various magnitudes. So clearly, there is a lesson to be learned. You can't say on the one hand, we have excessive rainfall and which is kind of destroying large parts of the city. On the other hand, you find every year households trying hard to kind of especially poorer households trying to kind of meet their basic water requirements by relying on water tankers and so on. And simultaneously, you also have the government trying to kind of use desalination plants to kind of process seawater to kind of supply water to the city. So, if you take all these three things put together, it's very obvious that, something is wrong with the way we are kind of planning. So water is definitely, so it's not natural. And I'm also trying to say what is that we need to do, when we talk about infrastructure. So clearly,
there is Rohit from Delhi who says that I see that parts of North Chennai did not face the flood problems. Why is that?
That's two factors. One, North Chennai is one of the oldest parts of Chennai city, and to that extent, it does have a fairly kind of, I wouldn't say it's still they maintained all that well, but at least in terms of drainage facilities and so on, parts of North Chennai is kind of not bad. But it's not to say that entire North Chennai was not affected. I mean, there are parts of North Chennai which were badly affected, but for various reasons did not kind of get the kind of attention that South Chennai got, because it's largely is a poorer neighborhood, and it's always lower middle class and the poorer people who live in North Chennai. So it's not that nothing happened there. But having said that, one also has to recognize the fact that it does have a relatively more robust drainage network compared to parts of Chennai which are developing at the moment.
What do people have to do to participate in this kind of governance?
If you look on paper, if you look at metro, city planning kind of mandates, especially post Jain and Yoram and so on, there is a lot of emphasis on citizens' participation, citizens' role in, planning for the city and so on, which is a very, very welcome kind of a move in terms of policy design. But what happens often is there's a huge mismatch between this entire emphasis on participation in in mandates and in design, as opposed to what happens on the ground. Invariably, participation is almost reduced to a very, very ritualistic exercise which takes place in five-star hotels and ballrooms and so on. So the problem with participation as it stands today is, one, it's invariably confined to a very, very few civil society organizations, which more often than not represent only the upper middle class sections of the city. That's one. And which also means, given the fact most of the cities are, consists of primarily, low income neighborhoods, if you look at population share and so on. So their voices do not get represented adequately. At the same time, they're so critical to providing basic services which the middle class actually, thrives on, but that never gets kind of, brought on board. That is number two. And number three, one also has to realize that while, yes, participation is kind of important, the people who are participating also should be equipped with adequate knowledge about, what a city ought to be. You can't come up with dreams of, Chennai being like Singapore or Hong Kong and so on. I think unfortunately that is what the real estate lobby is trying to kind of push for, and that is what most of the middle class participants also tend to kind of buy in. I think
if you look at the 74th Amendment Act, all sections of society have to be included in this process of discussion. The participatory planning, the local area planning which we talked about, should have all sections of society.
Right. Yes, that is very true. What actually happens is, see, how do people know that on a particular day consultation is happening? Things like that. That is where I think there is a strong need to kind of, in some sense, combine civil society initiatives with political representatives, or like ward councillors and so on. No, this mismatch is far too wide in most cases. I'm not saying it's kind of it's there universally, but more often than not, you find that civil society representatives do not have a proper communication channels with elected representatives. And simultaneously, elected representatives don't think that there is a big deal to be done through participation through participation planning and so on. So that is one. And second, one also has to realize ward level planning is important, fair enough, but also please remember what you do at the ward level also has implications for people living just outside your ward.
That's right. So you have to have city plan and then the local area plan fitted into it in tandem with the rest of the city.
Absolutely, and not just city plan. If you look at the crisis in Chennai, the other big lesson that this floods has taught us is you can't just see the city in isolation,
Yeah.
independent of the larger ecosystem in which, especially the water ecosystem in which the city is embedded.
Yes,
The bulk
absolutely.
of the flooding happened because of the fact that all the tanks, which are surrounding Chennai city, were all kind of flooded. They're all breached for various reasons. They're not maintained properly, and they kind of flooded, and that kind of runaway waters from all these tanks, went into Chemparambakam.
Yeah.
Which again, it had to be kind of released at some point in time. The way it is released has hugely problematic. But unless you realize that how all these waterways are connected, and none of them actually are within the Chennai city jurisdiction.
Yeah.
So that's the problem. So you can't, think of. That's why I said when you say living organism, you always kind of draw upon, resources from outside. You're also kind of, letting resources outside, into
That's
the
right.
larger system. If you don't have that in your mind, both for planners and for people who are participating, then even however good it might be in terms of how to get it would still not kind of help us kind of move towards making the city more sustainable.
Right. We have Neeraj from Jaipur saying, how can technology help us in improvement of sanitation and sewage in India?
Uh, the key thing is technologies exist, all kinds of technologies, you have the latest technologies. In fact, often companies kind of, sell kind of, green technologies in these areas. And simultaneously, there are large number of, alternate kind of technology outfits trying to say that, why our kind of sanitation systems do not actually follow models which are, located in areas which are water abundant. So there are all kinds of models. So the key thing is to identify the right kind of a technology, and this technology has to do two things. One, it should kind of take into account our kind of resource constraints, especially when the question of water. Number two, also has to take on board the fact that when a city like Chennai, which also has a long history to it, when it kind of evolves, when it tried to kind of network with through this thing, to what extent can this infrastructure be highly centralized is the question, that we need to kind of understand. Whether we have the resources to actually kind of maintain a highly centralized infrastructure, which can kind of at the same time be inclusive. You know? So
Right.
technological solutions have to be resource constraint sensitive and also sensitive to regional urban history.
Right. We have Ranganathan asking, what are the things that a buyer should analyze when he is looking for from the physical infrastructure before investing? For instance, you're buying a house. What are
Yeah.
the physical infrastructure points that you should analyze before you buy?
See, obviously, I mean, on a blank slate, the answer is very straightforward, right? Make sure whether you have drinking water, whether you have drainage facilities. Like, for instance, just to give an example, look, most of the apartment complexes which have come up on either sides of the IT corridor in South Chennai, they're not connected by sewerage systems at all. Actually, people rely on tankers to supply to feed them with water, and also rely on tankers to actually carry the sewage out of these apartment complexes. So clearly that is not on. And beyond that also, I would suggest that get a sense of what this area is going to look like 10 years from now. Again, look at the IT corridor. Where are the pedestrian pavements? You very much once you're inside the apartment complex, life is seemingly kind of nice, but once you step out, it's highly chaotic, right?
Right.
So clearly, and look at schools, access to schools, access to hospitals, and most importantly, commutes to your workplace. I think there's a strong rationale that the children don't travel very far to schools, that you don't kind of travel very far to work, for your own good and also for the ecological footprints that you're leaving behind in the city. Of course,
Absolutely.
not to mention education, healthcare, and and
So
water.
Tuhin from Kolkata has added to this debate, saying, "Why do we wait for natural calamity to happen for planning? Why can't we plan in advance to prevent a situation like Chennai in India?"
That's a larger question. I think that's the way we have always done, isn't it? Uh, See, part of the reason also has to do with the fact that over a period of time, we've also tried to kind of undermine the institutions which have tried governed. We are, simple things like, for instance, sanitation. over a period of time, you have privatized, sanitary services provision in the city of Chennai. Now, what happens is, while they may seemingly sound efficient in the short run, because of cutting down costs and probably they're working harder than a regular public worker, the sanitation also requires a repository of skills, which is combined in these sets of workers. And if a highly kind of a temporary workforce, where else are you going to, draw upon the skill set when you need them, during a crisis like that? So,
Right.
one thing is, there is a part dependence to it. We always tend to respond to crisis rather than proactively address the possibility of crisis kind of doing the kind of damage that it has done. And then two, I think there's also a problem with the way we're looking at urban planning. Primarily in terms of making it lean and mean, when probably it should be mean, but I think it should definitely be a lot less leaner than what it is at the moment.
Right. And Afzal from Srinagar, I think a city that can very well empathize with Chennai, has said that Srinagar too faced such a kind of tragedy earlier this year. Here, the infrastructure may not even be at par with Chennai city or other metro cities. What do you have to give as a solution to the city to avoid such natural disaster? He's talking in the context of Srinagar now.
Right. See, I mean, I'm not an urban planner, so I can only speak from the point of view of a social scientist, looking at urban issues. So all that I can say is it's about collective action. There has to be different kinds. There has to be pressure from civil society. There are the political representatives that you vote for have to be pressurized into realizing that that they can't just do things once in 5 years. They need to kind of actively engage on the ground, and all these things boils down to actually public pressure. I think that's the key thing. We are a democratic country, and then unless we take up responsibility in ensuring people are supposed to kind of work for us then no amount of planning from the top actually may be able to deliver in the long run.
Yes, I think people are the most interested stakeholders in the entire city in these processes, because if something goes wrong in your neighborhood, you're the one who's going to be impacted far more than the planners who talk about it at the city level. So how can people participate? I think we don't have the processes yet, but we're definitely trying to create citizen activism through Magic Bricks.
I'm very happy to know that, because little things, I mean, I'll just tell you, I don't know if you have the time, a small example as to see, where I think even as attitudes of citizens, we're kind of faulty. I live in an apartment complex about for 45 flats, and when the floods came, a basement got drained, got flooded. So we were trying hard to think of ways to kind of avoid this flooding. So what essentially we did was, as the association just got together a few powerful pumps, and we started pumping water outside, onto the road. So obviously that's not good enough. I mean, you can't. I think it actually represents our mindset. Once the problem is out of our compound wall, we kind of assume that things are fine. A little realizing that actually we're just shifting the problem onto somebody else. So unless that ethos of belonging to an urban community comes in, again, I don't know where it should come from, who should be in charge of teaching it, or, I think change has to come from, some either from within or some worst case scenario dictate from above, Yeah.
We've got Jasmine from Delhi saying, how do you know about a project such as construction quality, safety, and other features? There's a parallel question here. What should I keep in mind before buying a plot? You see, now exactly the same mindset that you're talking about. People are saying that planning is all very well, participation is all very well, but when I go out to buy, what should I consider?
See, actually, I'm not in the best position, because again, I'm not a legal person to look at. Obviously, look at titles, income and so on. I mean, these are all issues which everybody knows. So I mean, it's just, I mean, if I can use this platform to kind of reach out, this thing is, try hard, not to invest in plots that you don't really need. You need it for your own kind of housing requirements, or at best for your children. Don't use real estate as a means to kind of park your savings. I'm sure there are better ways of using your savings. That would be my first step.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, we've actually getting more queries like this, and I would like to tell our users that while Bhaskar is a social scientist and will be able to answer a lot of your queries, the ones
Yeah.
that he's not able to answer, we will definitely be passing on to some more experts, and we'll
Yeah.
be bringing more experts to talk about the issue. For
Right.
instance, Duranjit Kaushik from Mumbai has said, what should I keep in mind if I'm constructing my own house, which is close to the sea beach? Uh, More than anything else, I think what people's concern is that there are very sensitive ecozones within urban agglomerations, and
Right.
when suddenly they have realized that when you are in a sensitive ecozone, you have to think differently. Would you like to
Right.
comment?
Yeah, see, the key thing to remember is, I think there's no zone which is not eco-sensitive. I think that's the key. There is just, maybe gradations. Like for instance, this time, residential complexes which were more or less closer to the sea were not affected. It was more, residential complexes on either sides of the canal and the rivers which are kind of affected in the low-lying areas in the floodplains. Whereas when the tsunami hit, people are living in the closer to the sea were affected. So I think that it's important to remember no place is in some sense, safe. So all that one can say is make sure that it's not in the floodplains, it's not in the low-lying area. Look at past history of floods, past history of rains kind of affecting various regions, and then see whether the government has done anything about it. It's not that all parts have always remained like that, and something can definitely be done. Improve the drainage facilities. Things can kind of improve. So the key indicator is whether the government has invested in drinking water and massive public drainage facilities. That's kind of very important. If the government has done that, I think one can definitely sense that it's on the way to kind of being a good kind of a neighborhood or locality.
Pooja Srivastav is asking, do you think that relaxation of coastal regulations norms is somewhat responsible for the damages during the Chennai floods?
I mean, not during the floods for sure. I mean, it was a problem earlier during the tsunami hit, but it was because most of the neighborhoods which are affected were not the ones which were located in the buffer zone of the coastal regulation act. I mean, that's not quite the case. No.
Okay. And
Yeah.
then there is another person who's asked, can smart city help in fixing these urban city issues? What is smart city? Maybe yeah, we should spend a couple of minutes here talking about smart city and how it can actually help citizens.
Yeah, yeah. The smart, I mean, like increasingly a lot of terms are being kind of thrown around, and now being smart is the new kind of word. So it's an umbrella term, which captures all kinds of things. But I think what image that it is trying to kind of communicate is it has to be in some sense flexible, right? Adaptable to kind of innovations, to changes that are happening globally. There is this global kind of a frontier one has in mind, be it Hong Kong, be it Dubai, be it Singapore. And then, you feel that, your city should have the ability to kind of, get there at some point, through whatever way, that you want to do. But the key thing to kind of remember here is, yes, being smart is kind of important, but at the same time, it's important to recognize that there are basic things that a city needs. And I think, again, if you look at these big cities, like take Singapore, for instance, housing is public for the most part. The city has assured access to drinking water. Transportation is public, and private transport is in fact highly discouraged through a very, very kind of high tax kind of a regime. So you just take these three things alone and then use these parameters to see whether our smart cities actually kind of meet this criteria. Yeah. And of course, not to talk about drainage and so on. I think these are all public goods, and there is no escaping that. You can't say that just because one fancy hospital or a fancy apartment complex comes in, and you have a fancy IT corridor, which connects multiple apartment complexes straight to workplace and so on. That's not going to actually kind of make the city smart. You need to kind of invest in basic infrastructure, and then most importantly be sensitive to what your city's ecosystem is all about, city's history to begin with, and where it is located and what resources it draws on and throws out.
I think there has been some amount of anxiety, and I can see questions are pouring in. But we'll, since in the interest of time, since we are the tail end of our chat, we will take one last question. And
Okay.
this is somebody from Dhanbad who says that I was planning to buy in Chennai with one of the large real estate developers, and this is in response to what you have said right now.
Okay.
After the Chennai floods, should I call off this investment decision?
Uh, but why would you? I mean, in the sense that depends on again where you're located. I mean, it's very simple. I mean, you just need to look at the fall in property prices maybe 3 or 4 months down the road, and you'll get a sense of where the property values have fallen the most, and where property values have more or less remained stable. Or kind of increase. That will give a sense of where to buy within Chennai. That is, so if your kind of horizon is not just Chennai and the whole of India. Then of course yes. I mean I think there's enough information to kind of guide you as to where to go.
I think we're right at the we're absolutely running out of time, and thank you so much, Bhaskar, for joining us. Thank you, audience, for joining us, and keep those questions coming. We have a forum, the Magic Bricks forum, and the queries that have not been addressed here, we'll send some back to Bhaskar, the ones that are within his area of expertise. I'm sure he would be happy to answer them, and we'll put it back on the forum. And the rest of them, we will get answered by experts who have expertise in those regions. Thank you so much, Bhaskar, for joining us.
Thank you, Jayashree, and thank you, Pushpa.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bhaskar, for participating in this hangout. It was a great session, and thank you all the participants for their support in making this hangout a great success. Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.